it was obvious that my journey, which was public, and I come back to that, all the publicity that I had, but it was public, both to my inner circle of friends and a wider range of acquaintances that I had over the years. Some people, I thought people was going to applaud what I did. I mean, wow, leaving this position and go and help people out in Papua New Guinea, whatever. But people actually nearly gave me the finger sometimes. One woman said to me, she had a very leading role in Swedish media. She said to me, "What have you done? Think about all of us who are fighting and struggling for all our lives to get to the top position, and you just say, I don't care."
Well, Tomas, Micah and I are so excited to spend an hour with you and to learn from your story and from your wisdom. You know, the 100X podcast is designed to provide visibility for a whole generation of people that want to be the soil that produces 100-fold into the lives of people who are living that life, and to see, you know, what was it like? What is it like? How'd you get from here to there? We love that Jesus used soil and seed as a story of different kinds of soil that, and warned us not to get kind of tangled up in the things of this world or the deceitfulness of riches and be, you know, the soil that doesn't produce fruit. But then he went on to say that the seed sown in good soil represents people who hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop. Or in other words, real results in their life, some 30, some 60, 100-fold. So we want to uncover what you've been doing, Tomas, over these years to hear the voice of God, for you and Tina together in doing that, and then what you've done to respond to it, even when it's costly, and where you see him producing a crop that really brings you deep joy. So, Micah, why don't you lead our conversation?
Tomas, thanks for your time today. Excited to talk with you. And if you could just start out by telling us a little bit about where you grew up, how some of that affected what you're ultimately doing today, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on this podcast or pod, whatever it's called. I grew up in a mid-sized, no, a small town called Kinna in Sweden, Swedish West Coast. I grew up in a Christian family. We went to our local free church, which was not the norm where I grew up. Most people don't go to church in my country. So people have like a relationship to it when you're baptized as a small kid, when you go to, maybe you get married, and when you're buried. Those kind of the times you go to church. But we went to church, you know, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, most days a week. There were rehearsals, there were revival meetings, there were meetings. All about that. This was how I was brought up. So I was dragged along as a young kid, but then also later in life, this became my faith. Not that I was forced into something, but that I took deliberate decisions to follow Jesus. But still, it was not the norm. See, when you grow up this way and when you take these kind of decisions, and I took a lot of I had a lot of defining moments when I I served for the Swedish UN contingent on Cyprus. And that meant that I had a lot of time alone with God not in the desert of Cyprus, but in the rocky hills of Cyprus. I was 22 years old, where I took a lot of deliberate decisions to follow the Lord, and that was going to be my true north in my life, and would guide me the rest of my lives. So you could say that the way I was marinated with the biblical stories through Sunday school, through all these church meetings, but also reading a lot myself, this has become something that's part of me. And what do you say? And nothing that you can separate from my life. The way I'm thinking, the way I experienced Jesus in my early days. And maybe I should mention that when I was a little kid, the Jesus people, I know the Jesus Revolution is now out in the movie theaters in the US. That affected my life when I was 10 years old, and the leader of the Pentecostal churches in Sweden, he got a whole Boeing flying over these people from wherever it was in LA, the beaches of LA, and they came to Sweden to our meetings in summer of 1972, and it profoundly changed the little kid of Tomas Brunegård when I saw these hippies. I saw that Jesus can make a revolution inside a person.
That's awesome. So did you go to high school in Sweden and then go to university there as well?
Yeah, I went to high school. I did a year in the US. I was an exchange student as a senior in Hill City, South Dakota, right, very close to Mount Rushmore. That was also very defining, I should say, to experience a year in the US. We were 25 in the senior class, and there was a lot of, South Dakota was really poor at this time, maybe it still is, but a lot of people up there as well, my friends and their brothers and sisters were using heavy drugs, and this is in 1980. The times were not as great in the US as they've been lately. From an economic perspective, and after Watergate, after Vietnam War and everything, and the Japanese was out conquering the automotive industry and everything. So it was kind of a little bit of a dark years in the US, but this affected my life also very much when I saw how your life could end up if you choose a different trajectory. Then I went on to university. I studied business here in Sweden. And so on, and started my career here in Sweden, so with a consultant company. So that were my next phase in life.
How did you ultimately get into the media business?
Well, I started with a management consultant company. I worked for some years. We also brought Burger King to Sweden, which was kind of fun to have. I learned to eat the Whopper in Rapid City, South Dakota. So we brought Burger King here. McDonald's was doing phenomenally well. This is in the late 80s. Everything was booming. And then the big chaos of the early 90s affected Sweden a lot. We had days with 500% in interest rates. So right in that middle of that period, a headhunter called me and said that we want a young guy coming into the newspaper market with fast-moving consumer goods products experience. Would you like to join this tabloid company? And this was at the same time as Richard Gere was in Sweden, and he had found a young Swedish beautiful girl. They were swimming nude at the beach in southern Sweden, and this newspaper's photographer catched Gere with this young Swedish woman. And that was the biggest scoop ever. And then I decided I'm going to say no to this job. This is not what I'm going to spend the rest of my life on, doing this kind of scoops. But the owner of the company had gotten his eyes on me and called me up and said, would you like to become the CEO of the parent company, the group, which also included other newspapers and much more of like the bigger broad paper newspapers of Sweden. So this is how I ended up as CEO, 33 years old. And that was like I was like kind of picked up from the street into this very heavily high status job in Sweden. So fantastic journey, or fantastic move.
What was it like becoming a CEO at such a young age of a large organization?
Well, for the first, I had no experience. I'd been on the board for the only daily Christian newspaper, which my church was part owner of. That was really my own media experience that I had. I had been working with a broad variety of companies as a management consultant. And then, of course, I had my own leadership skills being developed, both in Burger King, but also as a young age in military, where I was picked out as a leader, was an officer immediately. But to get into this very high, you could say highly visible, highly status, a job with high status in my local community, that was, of course, new to me. And it kind of got me a little bit scared of the height that you went in, because suddenly all the doors were open to the other CEOs of Volvo, Ericsson, SKF, the whole Swedish business community. And then you had the journalists at this newspaper, Gothenburg Post, the second largest in Sweden. They thought, who is this guy that they dragged up from the streets, who has worked for Burger King? And who is he? And I couldn't, sit there and say, well, I'm the best guy you could ever see or get. I had to realize that I was nobody. They came kind of from the streets, but I was learning. So I did three things in the very early weeks. I said that I worked with hamburgers. I'm no experience in the newspaper industry. I come from the little town Kinna. I have no connections in Stockholm, Gothenburg, or London, or wherever. And I'm also belong to a Pentecostal church. And this is probably the worst thing you could ever say to the media community in Sweden. But I wanted to say this out loud because I knew that I had to be honest, deeply, deeply honest. And I remember the first week, and one of the most profile journalists, I was meeting the whole editorial team, 350. And they asked me, and this woman, she asked me, what's your salary? And I had a millisecond in my brain. Could I say what I earned? Because most people say, oh, that you ask the board, oh, that's a secret, whatever. But in a millisecond, I decided I'm going to tell them the number. And I did. I told them the number, what my salary was. And by that, I suddenly start to gain respect, because at least they could trust that I was open and honest. And that was the way forward for me.
So did hard work define that career? Like personally, how were you doing? Were you working all the time? How was your marriage going? Did you have children?
Yeah, it did. We actually spoke about that yesterday. My oldest son just became 30, and we talked a lot about the career. Sat here around my dinner table, and Lloyd knows what it looks like. So we had a conversation on how to live life. And we talked about these early days in my career, long working days, first one at the office, last one to leave, last one to go home on Fridays, because then I could take the little post-it notes and make all the calls that I missed during the week. I worked and worked. I did many, many hours. I had to learn the job from the beginning. I followed the people, the guys out in the distribution. As I was out with the guys in the printing plants. I did all these things because I wanted to get to know the people on the floor. I went out with the journalists, and they did when they did their leg work. So I had 2-3 years of really, really tough work trying to establish myself. And of course, I was also young. I was 33 years of age when I became CEO. So I was 2 decades younger than anyone else in the business. And that was also, of course, you went to meetings with the whole industry met, and there were all these hot shots that you've seen on TV or you read in the newspapers about, and just the feeling, I'm nobody here. I just have to survive, and that was actually my mode for a long time. But I also prayed a lot. I have to say that I prayed a lot over my work, and God help me, Lord help me to do something good with this position. Because I definitely thought that this is not something I have accomplished myself.
So I know you've written a book a little about kind of this season, and ultimately you went on to decide to do some things to impact the world. Can you kind of talk about your career in conjunction with where you were trying to make an impact and how you processed all of that?
Well, after, things went up and down, but I established myself. I got older. I got to learn. I went through a lot of chaotic moments in the media industry and in the newspaper industry. But suddenly, and then as I grew, I became more mature. People started to know who I was, and I got older. Suddenly, I ended up where I was in a position where I was one of the leading figures in my country in the industry. And then, of course, also the results started kicking in, the work. I mean, I was part of firing editorial staff for the first time in the newspaper's history, and it was 150 years old. So I did a lot of move where I was also accused of being the butcher. But people start to respect me, and this respect went on to wider circles. And right in the middle of this process of me growing together with the company, we started to do mergers, we started to do acquisitions. A pastor showed up in my town who I had gotten to know for some time, and that was Bill Hybels from Willow Creek Church, because Willow Creek had targeted Sweden very, very early on. And we had a few dinners at several locations. And at one time, he made an interview with our newspaper, and that went so-so. So, and they also asked me, can you join the board for Willow Creek in Sweden? And I was not sure, but I was on my way to the US. I was at Harvard for a strategy course with Michael Porter. On the way home, Bill and I had a breakfast together, and I wanted to talk to him why these interviews that he'd done in Swedish media was so-so, to be nice to him. And we had 2 hours of very good conversation. Before leaving that room, he said, you need to read this book. And he gave me Bob's book, Halftime, From Success to Significance. And I was reading that on my way back home. It was dedicated to Bob, to Bill from Bob. And it was just like hitting a gong inside my chest. And I was just over 40 now. So I started to investigate this book, and somehow Lloyd and I got connected in this process, and we eventually got to meet. Lloyd can talk about that later, because he thought that he didn't know what kind of guy I was. I was not a typical American CEO, I know that. But it led to that I started to feel a pondering feeling inside of me that, hey, sooner or later, I'm going to do stuff differently. I'm not just going to climb the corporate ladder. We're going to do, and my wife, Tina, was kind of intuitively on board with this notion. So I went to Dallas in 2008 and went through the Halftime Institute. Lloyd and I got to speak some more. And he actually stepped up on my way out to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Lloyd said, can I coach you? And yeah. So this feeling of that somewhere in life, sooner or later, there will be some sort of a shift, smaller or bigger, didn't really know. I was kind of brought up in this environment where, you know, the biggest thing you could do for Christ, that is to go to Africa, sell everything you have and go to Africa. But I realized kind of, maybe that's not God's plan for us. But that was what I had to struggle with, all these feelings and thoughts inside.
So, Tomas, you know, one of the joys of being 61 now is, you know, I know that we learned this journey together. We learned from each other. We challenged each other. We've encouraged each other. We've just modeled what it looks like to be the soil, to aspire to be the soil that produces 30, 60, or 100-fold. And then not only that, but you bring a very European perspective, even though it's a global perspective. And having come from the media industry, you have this broad perspective. And I'm, a very American capitalist, small-time entrepreneur, right? So very different. It was just so healthy for me. And then we built this deep bond. love and friendship. And, Micah, Tomas flew from somewhere in Asia to Charlotte, North Carolina, specifically to be at my 50th birthday party. And then the next day he flew home. And then a year or two later, when he turned 50, I went to Sweden on a Thursday, and we met up on Friday, and Friday night he had a gala birthday party down on the river in Gothenburg, and big band music, and Tomas loves big band music, so he plays the saxophone and clarinet, and so it was, and I had the privilege to be at his 50th birthday party, and then actually I had to fly home the next day because we had family vacation. And you might say, well, that's a little bit extravagant, but really it's what you do when you're on the journey with someone you love, who's extraordinary in their pursuit of God and their desire to change the world. What I saw, Micah, this is sort of for you and me learning, but what I saw at that birthday party was, I don't know, 400 people, Tomas, in a big tent, and the CEO of Volvo and the CEO of IKEA, ABB, and these big conglomerates sitting and witnessing who Tomas had become, and not so much his accomplishments, but who he'd become. And then I remember Tina, with great courage, stood up and delivered a speech, even though she doesn't like that. That was just breathtaking, and in this beautiful red dress. And to me, this epitomizes this journey of open-handedness, of saying, Lord, could you just please use me in ways that are winsome, humble, but really extending forth the word of truth, extending forth the light and love and compassion that God offers us in this world. So, Tomas, what are your feelings when you think about our 15, 20-year journey together of peers? I mean, thinking of me coaching you sounds ridiculous to me. I think you've coached me as much as I've coached you. What are your takeaways from these long years together?
Well, first and foremost, is this deep friendship that we have. I trust you, Lord. Lord, I was going to say Lloyd. I trust you. I trust you deeply. I trust you, and Linda. I remember when we were in the process of making deep decisions, and Tina, my wife, she got really scared. We were out in the boat. It was right in the middle of the summer. I think it's the last summer before we were going to kick off the big plan. And she got really scared. And we were out there on the coast. And I remember mooring or docking the boat. And we said, we need to talk to Linda and you. I don't know if you remember this, Lloyd,
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And we had to talk about all these fears that were coming, creeping down. What is it you say in the US? Fear kills dreams silently. This killed our dreams loudly. And it was coming that way. And just that we could sit there and have a heart-to-heart conversation with Linda and you was something that you have with very few friends. Before that, Lloyd had, because you are so experienced, Lloyd, you talk to so many, and I don't know if you know yourself, but you have an ability to get right through the point. You immediately find the weak spots. And you knew that one of my weak spots was that it could easily become my journey, could easily be the next career or Tomas Brunegård, whatever our plan was. So your first question to me was, what does Tina say? What did the kids say? And I had to hang up kind of, and then I remember walking down the stairs, and Tina was in the kitchen, and I had to start the conversation. What do you think? And this changed her world, because suddenly she felt, I'm included. I'm part of this journey. This is not a Tomas Brunegård career 2.0. This is our thing that we're going to do together. And that changed the whole scenario. And so I think, Lloyd, coming back, this deep level of friendship that we worked out through both being friends, doing fun things together, but also these very deep, sincere talks about, I was going to say, life and death, love and hate, all these, that has created this bondage that we have. And that makes us so secure with each other.
Tomas, can you talk about, as you processed, kind of having these dual career, running your media company and having an impact? How did you process and then eventually kind of make a transition to do more full-time impact work?
Well, the problem is that you leak what you think. And I can't hide my ineffectiveness. So people start to, so Bob's book was translated Swedish probably in 2008, 9, and I wrote the foreword. So suddenly these media journalists got the eye on that I was thinking about something called halftime. They even wrote articles about it. So my closest peers, they realized that there is something going on within me that will eventually lead to something. And this is why when I came back from Dallas, having been to the Halftime Institute, I went immediately to my friend, but also the main shareholder, Peter, and said to him, I'm going to quit in 4 years, because I was so deadly sure that I had to draw a line in the sand. And that was when I was going to turn 50, which was 2012. If this was good or not, you can debate, but I did that. And I told him I wanted to be true. I said, I'm going to quit in 4 years' time. You could kick me out. You can fire me. You could do whatever, but I'm not going to go to another job. I'm going to stay here. But on the 31st of December, 2012, I'm out of here. And of course, that's a very odd thing to do when you're sitting there and the company's growing and there is there's a lot of things on your shoulders and on your plate, but I wanted to be very honest. So if I had a dual career, I'm not sure, because I started to put one of my feet down very hard on that I'm going to do something differently. I also started to train to become a pilot, because somewhere I had on the radar that we want to go to the mission field. We want to try something that's different from the corporate career. And we saw MAF, Mission Aviation Fellowship, as a potential platform to stand on. But of course, I was there. I was leading a company. It was big. It was continued. And we had tons of business proposals coming up during these 4 years. We had the best ever coming up. And that was buying a Norwegian company and then do a merge in a new format. And I really had this problem of thinking, if I do this merger, what does it mean to my halftime career? Does it mean that I have to stay for another 3-4 years in order to secure this merger? It never happened, this merger. And it would have been the best for the company if it would have happened. And I'm today not sure whether that was because I wasn't really sure and never pushed, that extra mile or yard or whatever you would say to really get that going.
So did you end up making the transition at 50?
Yeah, but it was a mixed transition. It was I stepped down as CEO, but the owner has offered me to become the chairman of the company, and I took a year to come up with a decision on that one. The thing was that I had also become very active since some years back into the World Association of Newspapers, working with the both industry standards, but also all the freedom issues that the media is standing on. So really defending the press freedom, freedom of expression. What Sweden is fighting now in the Arab world, if you see that, and with Turkey and all that. We have the longest tradition in the world of this since 1766. So I had, there was a body for this called the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers. And I was on the executive committee, and they offered me to become the president or the chairman. And I really wanted to do this assignment or this job. And in order to do that, you had to have a local link, like in a local company or in a company somewhere. So I said, when I got that, I that defined that, okay, I'll stay on as chairman for the company that I led for 17 years as CEO, but I become the chairman, and then I do a period of also being the president of the World Association of Newspapers. So that kind of defined it. At the same time, we started to try small mission works. We went to Papua New Guinea. We did stuff. We tried our wings, so to speak. Also took on some non-operational board assignments in NGOs and also in regular business and companies. So my portfolio became a mix of stuff. And I had Lloyd said, make a story so people can Google you and try to understand what you do. But I had a really hard time to get that elevator version for myself. What do I really do? My heart was really in the transition I was doing, plus that I wanted to do this World Association of Newspapers thing. But I still had a kind of a big responsibility with the company, being the chairman. So it was a mixed bag.
And Tomas, I remember we had kind of a remarkable experience together. I was in Fort Lauderdale doing a talk in a hotel, and I was sitting on the balcony of my room overlooking the ocean, and you and I were talking. And I said to you, Tomas, if you had to pick between the perfect platform to live out your calling and doing it with the people you love, which would you pick? And you said, my friends. And just then 4 or 5 dolphins surfaced in the water right at my view. And they were swimming together. And I said to you, wow, look, here's 4 or 5 dolphins, and here's the entire ocean. And they could be anywhere. Why are they swimming a foot from each other, side by side in sync, coming up and out and up and out? And I felt like that was, in a certain strange way, sort of providential, right?
Wow.
So you've been doing that now for a long time with people that you've known and loved, buddies you've known and loved. And so talk a little bit about how that's played out in terms of your platform and what you were looking for, because Europe is largely a secular culture. If you're going to be salt and light, you need a platform that makes it accessible.
Yeah. It was obvious that my journey, which was public, and I come back to that, all the publicity that I had, but it was public, both to my inner circle of friends and a wider range of acquaintances that I had over the years. Some people, I thought people was going to applaud what I did. I mean, wow, leaving this position and go and help people out in Papua New Guinea, whatever. But people actually nearly gave me the finger sometimes. One woman said to me, she had a very leading role in Swedish media. She said to me, what have you done? Think about all of us who are fighting and struggling for all our lives to get to the top position. And you just say, I don't care. And you leave and you go. And I was so surprised that people would take it that way. On the other hand, I had my good old friends, people stepping up and said, we want to join you. We want to be part of this story. We want to, be back to back with you in this journey. And I've seen that now over the years. I mean, more than 10 years has passed by since I took this step. And I've seen that they come up, and we are like not the three musketeers. We are now 10 musketeers of 15 musketeers, standing back to back and fighting whatever is worth fighting for. But that has been amazing to see. And what happened when I had stepped out of this, the company that I've led ended up in difficulties. I left as chairman in 24 when the company had problems. The main owner had to step in out of various reasons. I still stayed on as the chairman for the World Association of Newspapers, but there were so many stories being run mainly in Swedish and Scandinavian media, but it reached all the way to London on this guy who was the CEO for so many years and quadrupled the company and fired all these journalists. What a stupid guy. So they made it 60 minutes of me and the main owner, Peter. They even made a play on the City Theater, and thousands of people came to see. I met one the other day who has never said that he was there, but he was there to see it. And there were 3 women playing on stage, me, my friend Peter, and his grandfather, Harry. And they were actually reading the Bob Buford's book from stage about this crazy guy who did all this media, did all that to the industry, but then went off to some half-time, half-religious, up in the clouds, kind of journey. So I met all of that as well, but it was amazing to see. I remember this triggered another phone call to Lloyd. We had a lot of conversations about this as well, but also my friends around, and also my church, where people stood up and kind of did a circle around me. And I think it's nearly like you get a tear in your eye when you hear these stories. So I meet my high school friends. Every 5th year, we have a high school reunion. We've done that now for many decades. And how they taken all these dinner conversations, all these dinner fights for me around the table. That is amazing to hear. And now 10 years later, this is my biggest asset. My biggest asset is not the success, is not the years of having run and done all these things and changing the industry and whatever, is the years when it was dark and when I was scrutinized by all angles and when I was under so much fire. So today when people call me or talk to me, wherever they call from, this is what they want to talk about. How do you survive?
It's amazing to just hear the adversity you faced and how you got through it. Can you talk about some of the joy you've had? Like, obviously you're a public figure, so you've had media attention and all, and not all of it positive, especially in the industry you're in. But can you talk about some of the fruit of the season, the impact you feel like you've been able to have through this halftime journey?
Well, we have done, we started to do the same halftime institutes as I experienced in Dallas. We've done that in Sweden since 2015. We do it twice a year, about 10 people every time. And that number of people is now a big group. And just the fruits of having walked side by side with these people for many years is such a joy. I mean, it's, what do you say? It's unbeatable. So to look into someone's eyes and say, hey, you were instrumental in helping me to find my trajectory or my purpose. We also do this on a European level. We started that during COVID. We do Zoom calls like this, where we get people from all the way from Russia to, not Russia now, but it used to be Russia, and then over to the UK or down to France or Romania, from wherever. And this is also amazing to bring people together from different contexts and be part of that. Lloyd and I have also done this like dinner talks. We had one over in St. Petersburg when that was open. We've done it in Warsaw. We've done a little bit all over, and that I just sense that there is something going on in the soil of Europe, and not at least the Ukraine war has sparked this, because the church in Ukraine and the church of Poland is such a testimony of God's provision and what you can do.
And Tomas, you and your buddies bought a business platform that you operate on called Euro Academy. Talk about how you came up with that creative idea to actually buy a company that had track record and clients and positive cash flow, and then infuse salty content into it.
Well, I didn't see this coming, but another one person saw this. His name is Mats. Mats was a pastor in Stockholm until his daughter in the 80s said, "Dad, you should step down from the pulpit." And he was a pastor in one of the leading churches in Europe, the biggest for a while. It was in Stockholm. And so Matt stepped down and formed a leadership development company called Your Academy. And he worked with this, and he has trained leaders since the 1980s, mid-1980s. There are hundreds, I was going to say thousands of leaders has been through his courses. But he came to me in 2017 and said, "Thomas, God has said to me, you should have my company." And I wasn't really keen on getting a company that God has said something to someone else. You should talk to me first then. But I tried this on two of my friends, said, "Should we buy this? Is this a way of like trying to be strategic and getting into the regular secular marketplace and reach, you could say, the unreached normal leaders that we meet every day?" And so in 2017 or 18, we acquired Your Academy. Since then, we have massaged the halftime message into the regular training and development things with as mentors and coaches that we use as a platform in Your Academy. And it's fantastic to see in this very secular Europe, where you weren't allowed to say Jesus or God or anything a couple of decades ago. Today is widely open to talk about spirituality, to talk about what are the spiritual dimensions of your life, and sooner or later you will also come close to the gospel of Jesus. And once you become friends, you become close, you can talk about these things, what has affected me. In my case, my story is open, and I've been open about my faith. So you just Google me and you find Jesus there pretty soon. But I have just learned to trust this process, and I see that it works. And I think one of the most fascinating things we've been also working with Your Academy but it's a mix between Halftime Your Academy. That's seminars we did down in South Africa in April at the embassy, where the ambassador opened the Swedish residence in Pretoria, and we could gather 25 South African leaders, and just run a seminar there. And we ran a seminar in Cape Town with Swedish tech entrepreneurs, and just how that has continued to work and evolve into something where we don't know where this is going to end up. And this is a mixture of everything, but I can see that if we don't come and just, use a fire hose, on people with the gospel, but you could think of Jesus as a source, where he says, "The one who's thirsty, come and drink." And I think this is what we see with Your Academy and with the halftime message, and how we can approach regular secular guys out there, CEOs, chairmen, whoever want to come. We are there.
And, Micah, it's interesting that it's just the same thing seeping out of Tomas from the time he was young, starting his career, right? When they asked him, "What's your salary?" and he shows openness and honesty. I mean, every person that comes through Your Academy is looking for purpose in life. And the process of finding purpose and meaning is the same no matter where you are on a spiritual journey. But it just so happens that if it's true about Jesus, that it's going to be compelling, and it's going to show up in joy. And like those dolphins swimming together, Tomas, you guys, I mean, I'm on Zoom with you guys when you're doing some of those groups, and it's just like, hey, we're having fun. Do you all want to join in? And we're living life that's real. It's not like the Desperate Housewives of Atlanta or something, where everything is fake and everything is, contentious and everybody's stepping on everybody. It's just the opposite of that. And now, Tomas, one remarkable thing that you and I experienced is when you sat here at this desk, 10, 15, maybe 15 years ago, I felt like I needed to get you to articulate in your own words in Swedish, because English is your second or third language, in your own words in Swedish to your friends what you wanted to do with the rest of your life. So on a surprise, I just said to you, look, I got my phone audio recorder on. I'm going to leave my study. I want you just to take 5 minutes and pretend you're on the back of your boat out in the archipelago, outside Gothenburg, and you're with your buddies, and they say to you, Tomas, tell us what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And just pretend you're there and speak from your heart. And so I pushed the little red button and I walked out. And then we had it typed up and transcribed. And so I made a note to send it back to you 10 years later. And first of all, those 10 years went so fast, didn't they? And then to hear your own words and see your own thoughts 10 years later, deep into this journey. So honestly, what was that? What did that feel like to you? What have you learned?
Well, I think that first and foremost, I've learned that God is faithful. Those inner feelings that I had, I sat there in your study and I just talked out, my vision of what I saw. But I saw friends, I saw building things where we got each other together, but where we also, I was going to say, in a bigger way than ever before, try to influence or the people or the spheres where we were, and in a new way. And I think, I can't remember exactly, but I think I also had a notion about my own local church, because that's always been central to me. And of 17th of September, in a month's time, a little more, we are opening up our new church, which is highly visible in my city. It's something which everyone talks about. It's there. It's new, and we are a little bit, that was part of my, because Bill Hybels really affected me some way. That was to believe in my local church. He said that the local church is the hope of the world. He said something in the local, if the local church works right. And we all know the difficulties with churches. And we know that we have the same difficulties over here, and we've been under fire for decades. So we are kind of been laying low for decades. But suddenly we are rising, and the way Sweden has been affected by the influx of refugees and by the becoming all these ethnical groups coming from all over the world, the church has become a central point, or a vital part also of city development. And that my local church is so fantastic. And that became also my wife's journey, Tina's journey in this halftime thing. So when I look back on all this, I can say God is faithful, and he is that in a massive way. But I also learned that people are faithful, like you, Lloyd, and like Stefan and Magnus and Dick and all these guys that have been around. We've been, you could trust them. That doesn't mean that it's easy, or that we don't have to fight, but it means that we have we are in there for life. We are together, and that works. That makes the whole journey, the whole fight, the whole whatever, it makes it worth it.
Yeah, there's a big difference between waking up every morning and feeling like you're on a cruise ship, or waking up in the morning and feeling like you're on a battleship. And when you're on a cruise ship, you wake up and you wander around the deck wondering what you're going to do to entertain yourself all day. I can't think of anything more boring. And when you're on a battleship, you wake up on time, you dress up, you show up, you find your assignments, you work with your buddies, you cover each other, like you say, back to back, you protect each other, and you have a purpose, and you're doing something that's really bringing, fighting the bad guys and enhancing the good guys. And there's enough pain in this world that we're so blessed we at least can put our time and effort into something that mitigates the suffering for others. So we should we should switch for the next 10 minutes or so to the
Can I add one thing? And that is what I've seen over the last year. So my old friend Matt said about a year ago, Thomas, stay open. You're going to meet new people, are going to cross your path during the next year. And what has been so surprising to me is that new people are now chipping in and saying that I want to become part of this network. I want to be part of your musketeer gang. And I've learned that I got to stay open. And these people come from all over. I had a meeting with 3 UK guys 2 days ago. There's a guy in South Africa who is really wants to do things. So suddenly people are appearing, and I couldn't know that the world was going to change so much. When I said in your study, I didn't see the Ukraine war coming. I didn't see all these financial crises coming, the COVID coming. And suddenly there is such a need for these relationships, these networks, and for doing the things that no one else could do if it wasn't built on these close networks of friends.
Thank you for listening to the 100X podcast. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast service. We would greatly appreciate it if you could rate the show and leave us a review. This podcast is sponsored by Anchor Investments, whose mission is to build America's most generous real estate company. To learn more, please visit anchorinv.com.